The ultimatum in the Galactic Council. The colossal metal doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep, resonating hiss. The hall, an amphitheater stretching hundreds of feet high, loomed with an ominous silence as Ambassador Elias Carter of the Terran Federation stepped inside. His polished black boots echoed against the gleaming marble-like floor, each step deliberate, exuding confidence, power, and something that many in this chamber had never associated with humans before: defiance. The Galactic Council was a monument to interstellar diplomacy, housing over 200 alien species within its vast circular structure. The seats of the council members rose in tiers of concentric circles, their forms illuminated by the dim, eerie glow of the great planetarium dome that arched above them, displaying the vastness of space. The flickering holographic projections of star maps and military reports cast ethereal blue and red hues across the room, adding to the weight of the moment. Carter exhaled softly as he surveyed the chamber. His expression was neutral, calculated. He had been warned of the arrogance of the council, their disdain for the young and primitive human race. But he was not here to beg. He was not here to plead for justice. He was here to declare war. The gathering of the old guard. The council members sat in thrones of various forms, some with pulsating bioluminescent veins, others appearing as floating crystalline structures. Tentacles, metallic limbs, and scaled appendages twitched in curiosity and thinly veiled boredom. They had heard humans complain before. This to them was just another plea for aid, another useless petition from a lesser race. Carter let them stew in their false sense of superiority. At the center of the chamber, floating above the grand circular table, was Council Speaker Exareth of the Valari Dominion. His crystalline body shimmered, reflecting shifting hues of blue and violet, the sign of calculated patience. His voice was an almost musical hum, resonating through the air. Ambassador Carter of the Terran Federation. Exareth greeted, his tone laced with disinterest. State your purpose before the council, though I suspect it is yet another petition regarding the disturbances on your outer colonies. Carter didn't smile. Not this time. The evidence of betrayal. From his long black coat, Carter retrieved a small metallic device and placed it on the center of the table. With a tap, a hologram expanded, stretching over the heads of the gathered council members, plunging the room into dim lighting as the projected images played. Screams, explosions, the wails of children. The footage showed a human mining colony under attack, not by nameless pirates, not by outlaws lurking in the void, but by organized fleets bearing the insignias of 3 major council species. Gasps rippled through the chamber. A few representatives flinched, others feigned skepticism. Carter let the horror sink in. The footage continued, innocent civilians slaughtered, entire families dragged in chains, human ships burning in the night. Then came the worst part. Another hologram appeared, this time showing financial transactions, trade agreements, and classified communiques. The evidence was irrefutable. It linked high-ranking council members to the slave trade. Silence fell like a death knell. Carter allowed himself a moment to enjoy it. The arrogance of the council. From across the chamber, a deep, guttural growl broke the silence. Representative Gorak of the Drakthal Empire, a massive reptilian alien, bared his serrated fangs in a sneer. "This is absurd," Gorak thundered, slamming his clawed fist against his armrest. "Fabricated lies. Humans have always been skilled at deception. Why should we believe?" Carter cut him off. "Because we didn't rely on video evidence alone." Another flick of his wrist, and a new set of holograms flooded the room. This time, banking records, intercepted messages, and ship logs scrolled before them, proving the involvement of council-backed corporations and governments. The chamber erupted into chaos. Accusations flew. Hushed whispers turned into frantic demands for explanations. Some representatives quickly checked their own devices, perhaps fearing what else humans had uncovered. Carter stood unmoved. The moment of truth. Speaker Exareth's color shifted to a muted gray, a sign of deep contemplation among his kind. "Ambassador Carter, these are troubling allegations." Carter's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "This is not an allegation. This is a declaration." The room stilled. The line in the sand. Carter took a single step forward, his expression now unforgiving steel. "For 5 years, we have pleaded with you. For 5 years, we have brought evidence. For 5 years, you have turned a blind eye to our suffering." He gestured to the burning colonies in the hologram. "No more." He tapped his watch. The hologram shifted once more. This time, thousands of red markers appeared across the Galactic Council's star maps. Human fleets. Moving. Positioning. Preparing. The Council's emergency lights flashed red. "What have you done?" Exareth's voice held a rare tremor of fear. Carter gave him a cold, calculating smile. "We didn't build warships. We converted our trade fleets. We have been positioning for this moment for years. And now, every key military target in your empire is within our reach." He turned to face the Council in full. "You have 1 hour." His voice was like a death sentence. "Either surrender those responsible, dismantle your corrupt trade networks, and free every human held in your chains." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Or humanity will burn your empire to the ground." The ticking clock. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council was silent. Outside the great dome of the chamber, the shimmering blue light of the Terran fleet began to unfold, revealing the true strength of humanity. Carter checked his watch. The countdown had begun. The storm begins. The Council's fracture. A thick, suffocating silence choked the Galactic Council chamber. The soft hum of holographic interfaces and distant chatter of frantic assistants were the only sounds as Speaker Exareth processed what had just been laid before them. A declaration of war. Not a plea, not a warning. A cold, precise ultimatum. All around, the gathered representatives of over 200 species sat frozen, their varied expressions ranging from shock to fury to panic. The sheer audacity of humanity's move was unthinkable. They were supposed to be the youngest, weakest species in the known galaxy, not a race capable of maneuvering an entire armada into position right under their noses. The holographic map still hung in the air like a ghostly specter of what was coming. Thousands of red markers representing hidden Terran battle groups had appeared in strategic locations across Council-controlled space. Space stations, shipyards, military outposts. Every key installation was within striking distance. And worst of all, the Council hadn't seen it coming. Panic in the ranks. Councillor Drell Kato of the Nyran Republic, a race of multi-limbed arthropod-like beings, clicked his mandibles in disbelief. This is madness," he screeched, his segmented arms twitching. "Humans do not have the numbers to challenge the entire Council. This is a bluff." Ambassador Elias Carter didn't so much as blink. "Try us." The unshaken certainty in his voice sent an icy ripple through the chamber. "Our intelligence suggests they lack the firepower." Another counselor, Vorik of the Scale Dominion, growled. Carter cut him off, tapping his watch again. A new hologram emerged. A fleet of ships, massive, sleek, highly advanced vessels, unlike anything the Council had documented before, appeared. The ships bore the markings of the Terran Federation, but these were not standard warships. They were cargo haulers, mining rigs, and deep space survey ships. And then, right before their eyes, the ships transformed. Hull plates shifted, weapon batteries emerged, missile silos opened. What had once been civilian transport vessels now bristled with concealed armaments. "These were your freighters," shouted Councillor Balos of the Anvari clans, a species of ethereal, translucent beings. "Your damned merchants." Carter smirked. "Exactly." The Council's entire surveillance network had been watching the wrong ships. The masters of deception. For years, humanity had been dismissed as a fledgling species, good only for trade and diplomacy. Their warships were monitored, catalogued, expected. but their merchant fleet, the thousands of cargo haulers, freighters, and trade vessels that crisscrossed Council space daily. Those had been ignored. And while the Council's forces watched the obvious threats, those unassuming ships had been modified, refitted, and repositioned into strategic choke points, military strongholds, and defensive bottlenecks. The Council had been blind. "We've spent years preparing for this," Carter continued, his voice calm but sharp. "You took our patience for weakness. You mistook our trade for submission. You assumed that, because we tried peace, we lacked the will for war." He leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes locking onto Speaker Exareth's crystalline form. "You were wrong." A low rumble of unease spread through the chamber. Some species, those with sharper instincts for survival, were already shifting in their seats, preparing their next political moves. Others, like the war-driven Drakthal and ruthless Voric Scale, looked ready to fight. Speaker Exareth lifted a crystalline limb, signaling for order. "Ambassador Carter," he began, his voice now carefully measured, "this is an unprecedented situation. We must consider the ramifications of—" A siren blared. Every holographic display in the chamber flickered, switching to emergency alerts. The first shot. Across Council space, Terran forces had begun to move. "What is happening?" Voric snarled, his scaled hands clenched into fists as his personal holographic assistant fed him real-time reports. Carter checked his watch. Exactly what I said would happen. The Terran military had waited long enough. Within seconds, dozens of Council-aligned pirate outposts blinked out of existence. Hidden weapons platforms disguised as communication relays powered up, obliterating black market slave hubs that had operated under the Council's blind eye. Strike teams dropped into known smuggling rings, overwhelming slavers and liberating human captives. Across 3 major star systems, human forces launched simultaneous raids, neutralizing every pirate stronghold that had ever targeted Terran civilians. Reactions of the mighty. Speaker Exareth was not a fool. The crystalline being processed information faster than most organic life forms, and what he saw was devastating. They are not attacking Council military forces directly, he realized aloud. They are eliminating the slavers, the criminals, the corrupt. Councillor Gorak roared in rage. "You think this makes you just? You think you can come into our space and impose your will?" Carter's smile vanished. "No, Councillor. You did that to yourselves. We are simply enforcing the justice you refuse to deliver." Exareth turned to the military council representatives, his voice edged with urgency. "Deploy defensive forces. Protect our assets." A new holographic alert interrupted him. Council military forces were failing. The Terran fleets weren't engaging in traditional fleet warfare. They were disrupting supply lines, taking over refueling stations, disabling key logistical hubs. The Council's war machine was being dismantled without a single direct engagement. The final warning. Carter took one last step forward, the air around him charged with intensity. "You have 45 minutes left, Speaker," he said, voice carrying through the chaos. 45 minutes before we expand our targets." He turned toward the gathered representatives. "Your species have sat upon this throne of power for millennia, believing you were untouchable. That time is over." He adjusted his cuff, the small motion sending a wave of unease through the chamber. "You have a choice," he said. "Stand with us against corruption and slavery, or be destroyed alongside it." The holographic countdown ticked down. The future of the galaxy would be decided in less than an hour. Humanity's reckoning begins. The galaxy watches in silence. The holographic countdown flickered above the Grand Galactic Council chamber, a silent executioner ticking away the moments before history was rewritten. Beyond the transparent planetary dome, space itself had become a battlefield of unseen maneuvers. The massive Terran fleet, once hidden in plain sight, was now fully revealed, no longer traders and merchants, but a war machine poised for conquest. From their seats of power, the galaxy's oldest empires sat in stunned disbelief. Ambassador Elias Carter remained motionless at the center of the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the chaos unfolding. The council had ruled for centuries, but now, for the first time, it trembled. Some counselors whispered hurriedly to their aides, others stared at strategic displays in horror as their military supply lines collapsed, and still others, the ones who knew they were guilty, were already plotting their escape. Cracks in the coalition. Speaker Xareth's crystalline form dimmed, shifting into a deep shade of blue, a color of deep distress among his kind. "This is beyond reckless," he finally spoke, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "You are destabilizing galactic peace, Carter. If you do not halt this madness, you risk dragging us all into ruin." Carter's expression remained unreadable. "Peace," he repeated, voice like sharpened glass. "You mistake tyranny for stability." Speaker. A hollow silence. Xareth hesitated. "If you demand reforms, if you want justice, then negotiate. We can establish trials, investigations. You had 5 years to do that." Carter cut in. "And instead, you took bribes, turned a blind eye, and let my people rot in your chains." His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Now we take justice for ourselves." The first retaliation. A new alarm blared through the chamber. This time, it wasn't a Terran attack. It was Council forces mobilizing. "Incoming transmission," one of the aides muttered. "The Drakthal war fleet is on the move." On the holographic display, a massive battle group of reptilian warships began accelerating toward Terran-occupied systems. They weren't waiting for negotiations. They were going to strike first. Councillor Gorak, the Drakthal warlord, rose from his seat. His yellow slit pupil eyes gleamed with savage delight. "Finally, some spine from these humans," he growled, fangs bared. "I was growing tired of all this talk. Now we shall see what your kind is truly made of." Carter's expression didn't change. He simply tapped his watch again. A new image appeared. A Drakthal war fleet, one of their largest armadas, was shown, burning. The council chamber fell into stunned silence as the wreckage of dozens of Drakthal warships was displayed across the chamber, drifting helplessly in the void. The footage was less than 10 minutes old. "We already knew you'd try to respond with force, Counselor," Carter said smoothly. "That's why we moved first." The power of preparation. The Council had underestimated human patience for decades. They assumed humans were too weak to fight, too eager for diplomacy, too new to space to understand real war. But humanity had done something no Council race had ever considered. They had waited. For years, the Terran Intelligence Division had mapped every trade route, every fleet movement, every possible countermeasure. Their merchant ships had been quietly observing enemy tactics, hacking into vulnerable networks, gathering intel. And now, when the Council finally chose to fight, they found themselves outmaneuvered before the battle even began. The Drakthal war fleet had launched their first strike, only to walk into a carefully laid trap. Terran interdiction fields had disabled their jump drives, leaving them adrift before Terran warships tore them apart. The battle lasted only 6 minutes. The Council's fear grows. Councillor Balos of the Anvari clans, a race known for their cold strategic brilliance, leaned forward, his form flickering with agitation. "You disabled an entire fleet before they even fired a shot." His voice held the first true traces of fear. "How?" Carter's lips twitched. "Trade ships have access to a lot of places your warships don't. You turned your traders into spies." "Correction," Carter said. "We turned your arrogance into our greatest weapon." Speaker Xareth looked to his advisors, his tone growing more urgent. "What of the Vorik fleets? The Nharan defense lines? The Valari strongholds?" More reports came in. The Terran fleet was already there too. The Council was trapped. The realization of defeat. Slowly, the weight of the situation crashed down on the assembled rulers. This was not just a war. This was an execution. Terran forces had infiltrated every major strategic location, every blind spot, every weakness. The Council had always dismissed humanity as a species of diplomats, traitors, and scavengers. They never thought of them as predators. Now they knew the truth. The final demand. Carter took a slow breath. "Your time is up, Speaker." The holographic countdown hit 0. The chamber shuddered as a massive explosion rocked a distant sector of Council space. A Terran task force had just eliminated another slave market. "Last chance," Carter said, voice deadly calm. "Stand down. Surrender those responsible. Free every last human you have taken." His next words were absolute. "Or we burn your empire to the ground." For the first time in millennia, the great Galactic Council of Elders did something they had never done before. They considered surrendering. The breaking point. The crumbling order. The Galactic Council chamber had never felt so small. For centuries, this hall had been the seat of absolute power, a place where entire civilizations came to seek alliances, negotiate treaties, and bow before the unstoppable force of galactic order. Now that very order was fracturing. As the final echoes of Ambassador Elias Carter's ultimatum faded into the tense silence, a deep, creeping realization sank into the bones of every alien representative seated in the vast amphitheater. Humanity had not simply challenged the Council. They had checkmated it. The holographic countdown had reached 0, and beyond the Council's grand planetary station, in the depths of space, the consequences of their inaction had already begun. Reports poured in, urgent, frantic, desperate. Entire sectors were being seized. Trade routes had collapsed. Pirate lords and slavers, the hidden hands of Council corruption, were being systematically wiped out. And worst of all, Terran forces had done it without firing a single shot at the Council's fleets. The galactic superpowers were being dismantled from within, like a rotting corpse crumbling under its own weight. For the first time in thousands of years, the unthinkable had happened. The Council was losing. The War Council implodes. A storm of shouted protests, accusations, and panic exploded across the chamber. This is an act of war. Humanity must be crushed before they destroy the entire balance of power. Impossible. How could they have moved so many warships into position without detection? They were never warships. What do you mean? Their merchant fleet. They turned their traders into soldiers and their cargo ships into war machines. It was chaos. Factions that had once stood united under the Council's rule were now fighting each other with wild desperation. A galaxy on the brink. The Voric clans wanted immediate military retaliation. The Anvari strategists were already drafting surrender conditions. The Nyran Republic refused to commit, waiting to see which way the wind blew. The Drakthal were demanding a bloodbath, calling for war. And then, there were the silent ones. The smaller species, the minor races, the ones who had lived under the Council's shadow for generations. They watched, and for the first time, they saw a new possibility. Because if humans could defy the Council and survive, so could they. Speaker Xareth faces the inevitable. At the center of the chaos, Speaker Xareth remained motionless. His crystalline body pulsed with a slow, erratic light, a sign of deep internal conflict. The Speaker of the Galactic Council was supposed to be an immovable pillar, a beacon of absolute authority. Yet, as he looked across the chamber at the unraveling unity, the unraveling lies, the unraveling future, he realized the truth. The Council was already dead. It had been dying for years, rotting from the inside. Its bloated bureaucracy shielding the powerful, while entire species suffered in silence. Humanity had simply been the first to say what others had feared to whisper. And now, they were making sure no one ignored them. Carter's final warning. Ambassador Elias Carter remained still as the Council descended into chaos. He had seen this before. He had counted on this. He took one slow step forward, and the entire chamber fell silent. His voice, calm and unyielding, echoed like a hammer striking steel. "Your time is up." The statement sent a shockwave through the council. Several representatives glanced at their personal devices. They had been waiting, hoping for reinforcements, waiting for some signal that the council's military had regained control. They found nothing. Carter's eyes flickered over the gathered leaders, his expression unreadable. Your corruption was your weakness. Your arrogance was your downfall. You refused to listen when we begged for justice. Now you will listen, because we no longer ask. A slow, dreadful pause. Then, you will meet our demands. Now, the impossible choice. Speaker Exareth's voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. And if we refuse? Carter turned toward him fully. His response was immediate. Then your council will burn. A horrified murmur swept through the room. Some counselors looked to their security officers, wondering if they should attempt to seize Carter by force. Then the station shook. Not from an attack, not from an explosion, but from the arrival of an armada. The final move, humanity's true power revealed. The transparent dome above them darkened as hundreds, no, thousands, of Terran warships materialized from hyperspace directly above the Council station. Every battle-hardened admiral on the Council knew what they were looking at. This was not a normal fleet formation. This was an extermination pattern, a formation designed to siege, occupy, and destroy entire planetary strongholds. And it was pointed directly at the Galactic Council's homeworld. The moment of surrender. Speaker Exareth's color dimmed completely. Silence gripped the chamber. Then, what do you want? Carter's lips curled ever so slightly. Victory. He had already won. The terms of a new galaxy. Carter raised his hand, and a holographic treaty materialized above the Grand Chamber. Immediate dissolution of all sanctioned slave markets. Public trials for every council member who profited from human trafficking. Restructuring of the council's governance with human oversight. Freedom for every species under council oppression. The council representatives froze. This was not just a demand for justice. This was the end of the council as they knew it. This was the birth of a new order. The new era begins. Speaker Exareth closed his eyes. He could refuse. But then, the council would cease to exist by force. And so, with centuries of power crumbling around him, Exareth did the only thing he could. He bowed his head. The council accepts your terms.